Just right, likable characters is the worst advice you can give to any writer. The worst part is that everyone gives us advice because almost everyone knows little to nothing about character creation. This sucks because whether or not you have good or poorly written characters will impact the overall quality of your story the most. One of the biggest reasons why this so-called advice is so unhelpful is because it's so vague. Of course, you want your audience to like your characters, but all this does is give the obvious what without the not so obvious how. When pressing these critics on what they mean by this, they'll usually imply that the protagonist should be virtuous, like a hero. I wonder where they got that idea from. Thanks, Joseph Campbell. And generally, this is how people will perceive that advice to mean anyway. The problem is that almost everyone has the exact same idea of what characteristics of a virtuous hero looks like. And because of that, those who take this advice to heart will create the same bland, generic character over and over again. This is my theory as to why so many modern protagonists feel the exact same, with maybe only a few surface level quirks to separate them from the rest of the crowd. In my eyes, generic advice will typically yield you generic results. But don't worry, if you're an aspiring writer or simply want to learn more about the medium of story, I'm going to give you 3 steps that will set you on your journey of creating good characters.
Step 0.
Write your characters internal to external. I put this at step 0 because it's less of a writing technique and more of a mindset. I want to break this awful mindset of trying to find the true character self through the persona. It is exponentially harder for the writer to reverse his arbitrary surface level traits that hold little to no connection to each other than it is to write characteristics inspired by the true character. Just like in real life, it is the persona that is influenced by the core self, not the other way around. So why would it be any different when writing fiction? Well, the simple answer is that it's not. Characters that are externally inspired rather than internally inspired, more often than not, feel as if they're held together with duct tape in the writer's boogers. Plus, it's not the writer's job to figure out who the character really is through the character's external traits. That's the job of the audience. The writer should already know who their character is before driving headfirst into the story. A well thought out protagonist is a well thought out story. The reason the audience gets to have the fun of trying to solve the mystery of who is behind the character's persona is due to the fact that they're not the ones writing the mystery. Your job as a writer is to drop hints through the character's external traits, actions, and choices, so by the end, the audience will be able to understand deep down who this character really is. But that's a little hard to do when you don't already know. In addition, it paves the way for more unique characteristics that come up naturally, as they will feel more internally inspired, because they are, rather than the feeling of an arbitrary quirk that will end up making your character seem more like a stereotypical caricature rather than an actual individual, completely annoying your audience by the end of it all.
Step 1.
Give your character a core wound. The core wound is the main trauma that a character experiences, and it must have happened either at the inciting incident or before it. It must be this way because the core wound must have heavy influence over the character's subconscious, which means that it will also have quite the influence over the character's conscious thought and decision making. And because the inciting incident is the turning point that switches the narrative from introduction to full-on action, conflict, and of course, dilemma. Therefore, the core wound must happen during or before that point, so that it may properly execute its narrative purpose. That doesn't necessarily mean that you must show or exposit the trauma in that time, just that it must occur timeline-wise to that character during or before that point. You may reveal the trauma to the audience at any time you please. It may even give more dramatic weight to it, since it might cause your audience to wonder what exactly makes this character become the thing that they have become. Finally, answering that question the viewer has been asking the whole time. But don't take too long, because then the viewer might start to think about time instead of a more empathetic response. You can see this in masterpieces like Evangelion, Neon Genesis. They reveal the protagonist's core wound immediately. You don't want them to grow annoyed with the character before the reveal, as they might feel that it is a quick fix to justify the character's actions, even though you and I both know it wasn't. But in a lot of cases where this happens, oftentimes it is. There's a fine line between mystery and refusing to answer the viewer's questions. A good practice is not to wait much longer beyond the midpoint to reveal the protagonist's core wound. However, for other characters in the main cast, even the antagonists, it's more acceptable to wait a little longer. Your character needs a goal. While this is the second step in the process of character creation, it is unarguably the most important aspect of your character, especially your protagonist. You'll understand why in a moment. If you want your protagonist to be more unique, you can always give them a more unique goal. And the best way to do that is to put them in a unique setting, such as achieving a job or a role that is exclusive to that world or setting. The characters must benefit, or at the very least see themselves benefiting when they achieve their desire. This is an absolute must because in the pursuit of their desire, they are going to encounter conflict from antagonistic forces, mainly the antagonist. It doesn't make sense for them to go through all that conflict just to get something that they didn't even believe would make their lives better. And the way I see it, the more the character benefits from their desire, the more intense the conflict you can put them through. Because the more value that achievement brings, the more they'll be willing to sacrifice. That's why truly selfless goals don't make any sense. A character without any selfish intent has no real goal and serves no real purpose in your story. Along with that, it's not just enough for that character to have a selfish goal. They must also be actively pursuing it. If not, then that goal won't be able to serve its purpose, and you'll be left with a crappy passive character. And no one likes a passive character. Well, except maybe hipsters. Ugh, yucky. The character's goal should also be influenced by the core wound. Notice how I said should instead of must? That's because it's not necessary, but it is recommended. While it probably won't decrease the quality of your work, making the goal influenced more often than not will raise the quality of the work. If you don't get what I'm saying, let me phrase it like this. At the end of the day, no one's gonna call your work bad because you didn't make the core wound influence the goal, but you will probably receive more praise when you make it influence the goal. You know, on my Edgerunners video, I received a comment that went along the lines of, David's goal was just about existing in the world. That's what I thought it said. Going back now, I realize I misread the comment. His comment being more along the lines of, the theme isn't about his goal. But that was never my point. And the theme also isn't about that either. And boy, would that be a boring theme if it was. So I have to rewrite this a little bit. But I realize that my point still stands, so I'm gonna keep it in anyways. Just in case. Well, enough being around the bush. I'm just gonna come out and say it. Maintaining the status quo is not a goal. The whole point of a goal, and especially your protagonist's goal, is to keep the story moving. And you can't do that if the protagonist wants to keep everything how it is. A goal like just wanting to exist doesn't make any sense because you can't really get anywhere with that. The only exceptions I could possibly think of to this principle are if the story and theme are about learning to accept change, or if that character can get more of that something, like in Breaking Bad and Evangelion. Walter White from Breaking Bad wants to leave behind a lot of money for his family when he dies. But the thing is, he can always leave more money behind to his family, which allows for a perpetual direction for the story, even if later we find out that he's less in the money-making business and more in the empire-building business, which is something that is influenced by his core wound, wink wink, of being manipulated out of his own legal business in the past and forced to live a life of mediocrity. And for Shinji Ikari, from Eva, he wants to be liked and loved. And while he achieves those things pretty early on in the episodes, such as love from his friends and new family, he could always get more of it, and even different flavors of it, such as romantic love. Wait, no, that's not what I meant.
It should have been me, not him! It's not fair!
Make them weak. Or I mean, like, just give them a weakness. Usually, people refer to a character's weakness as a flaw, but I have recently taken a liking of calling it weakness because it implies more narrative significance, because the flaw should hold narrative significance. If it doesn't, you don't have a character flaw or a weakness. You merely have a neat piece of trivia about that character, because it really doesn't matter if it's revealed a character is awful at cooking when the story involves no cooking. So the first principle is that the weakness must hold significance in the story. We do that by causing the character to stagger due to their weakness when in conflict with the main antagonistic force. And you should only give your character one weakness, or at least one per character. This is because if you're watching this video, you aren't likely going to be able to juggle multiple weaknesses in one character, especially if the length of your stories are on the shorter end of time. Film length or less is simply not enough time to develop multiple weaknesses for one character. Like the character's goal, the weakness of the character should also be connected to that character's core wound, albeit this holds more weight to it because usually the weakness is used to enact the core wound's will of affecting the choices of the character. It's done this way because it makes sense, and the audiences love things that make sense. And you know what? I like it when things make sense too.
So that was a fucking lie.
Next up, the weakness must be correlated with the theme. Why? Because it just makes sense.
But what if my story doesn't have a theme?
In that case, you've got some major rewriting to do. Something writing is rewriting. I don't know who said that, but you get the idea. Your revisions were inevitable anyways. Your story must have a theme, as it is one of the fundamental pillars that makes a story a story. It gives meaning to the work and overall value since the viewer ends up learning something along the way. Whether or not a story has a theme and subsequently meaning is what separates art from schizophrenic chicken scratch. A themeless weakness would be nothing more than a plot device that keeps the protagonist from ending the story quickly. Well, at least it would be if it wasn't for the fact that it makes the character more relatable. Once again, just write likable characters is awful advice because it is as hollow as the characters that it creates. The biggest reason for that, which I neglect to talk about in my intro, is that it puts more focus on characterization. Most people mistakenly believe that characterization is the same as writing a character, but there are actually two broad stages you go through when writing, and that's characterization and true character. Characterization is the act of writing the character's external, while true character is the act of writing the character's internal. This is suboptimal because the internal is what creates the external, not the other way around. And as stated prior, it's not a good idea to prioritize the external over the internal, for the same reason. This is why I gave you 3 separate yet connected true character traits that will assist you on your writing journey. Your character must have a core wound, and that trauma should affect the character's goal and weakness. However, it must affect their actions. Your characters must have a goal and must actively pursue it. Your characters must have a weakness, and that weakness must impact the plot. By the way, these principles don't just apply to the protagonist, but are applicable to every character in the story's cast. As a matter of fact, you can see these techniques being utilized in masterpieces like Evangelion, Neon Genesis. Basically every character, and I mean even characters in B-cast like Ritsuko and Fuyutsuki, have these traits, and it makes them better for it. Now, does this mean that you can create the next Eva by only utilizing these techniques alone? Nope. But depending on how well you follow my instructions, it can very well put you ahead of your competitors. But hey, if you learned something from this video, you should like and subscribe, as you'll receive more helpful videos like these in the future. And as a reward for sticking this long into the video, I'll give you another piece of advice. I tend to find, more often than not, it is the novice to intermediate writers that make the protagonist happy in pursuing and or achieving their goal, while it is the masters that do the opposite. Now, if you would excuse me, I've got to return some videotapes.
Go fuck yourself. 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 Go fuck yourself.